Welcome back, everyone, to One Foot in the Grave. We're your hosts, Taylor Rido.
And Jen York.
Appreciate you going along with this, listening along, I should say, in this podcast journey. Again, our first foray into podcasting, so hopefully you've enjoyed it, and we hope to do more of these in the future.
Yeah, we're both journalists in Spokane, Washington. And in the news biz, we have a thing called a beat. Something that we focus on, and that is our main reporting focus. And for you, Taylor, it's North Idaho.
Yeah, so in our area, you have Eastern Washington, and you have the Idaho Panhandle, colloquially referred to as the North Idaho by locals. And that's just an area that I've been assigned to cover and been doing that for over half a dozen years now. So gotten to know several different people. It's a beautiful place. But yeah, there are some differences between Washington and Idaho, so have a little bit of experience covering some of the differences there in the judicial system, state laws, that sort of thing.
And grammatically, we know it should be Northern Idaho. They just call it North Idaho here.
Yes, exactly.
So don't come
When
after
you hear
us for that.
Yeah, that rolls off our tongue, yeah. But trust us, that's how the locals talk.
This is how we roll here in the inland Northwest here, folks. But as you were mentioning, there's quite a divide when it comes to Washington and Idaho. Even though Spokane and Coeur d'Alene are separated by 30 miles or so?
Yeah.
It's almost like there's a difference of opinion depending on which side of the state line you're on.
Yeah, and granted, the state capitals of Washington, or excuse me, of Olympia and Boise are super far away. There still is quite the difference, and certainly some state laws, some big state laws between the two, and definitely I think it's safe to say the political mindset of some in the city of Spokane, especially the city itself, compared to the political mindset of many in North Idaho and the more rural areas of North Idaho.
It's pretty conservative, would you say?
Yes, absolutely.
In general, in that area. And so we're going to be using Taylor's expertise in his field here in North Idaho for this upcoming episode. So let's get back into the story. A month-long mystery has come now to a gruesome end, with detectives unearthing the bodies of 16-year-old Tylee Ryan and 7-year-old J.J. Vallow, both found buried in various states on the property of Chad Daybell. And now Chad and the children's mother, Lori, are in jail facing charges related to their disappearance and manner of burial, but neither is facing a murder charge for their deaths. Capital punishment is legal in Idaho, but what remains to be seen is if these crimes against Chad and Lori will result in the same outcome legally as it did for JJ and Tylee. This is One Foot in the Grave.
Okay, we've discussed the backgrounds of the key players in this story, and we've also chatted about what led up to now. So this leads us to what's next and how will the court case play out. Vallow is accused of desertion and non-support of children, according to a criminal complaint filed in Idaho. Two of the charges, as felony abandonment of a child, can carry up to 14 years in prison. Daybell is charged with 2 felony counts of concealment or destruction of evidence, along with 2 counts of conspiracy to commit destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence. In August 2020, an Idaho judge formally ruled that Daybell's case could move forward and that the state had shown probable cause. In other words, prosecutors have shown that there's enough evidence there for a trial. Aside from the publicity, this case is just so unique and strange.
So when we're looking at how this could potentially play out in court, I want to know, are there any similar cases like this that have happened in our area or in North Idaho?
So in doing this podcast, we wanted to look at similar cases in Idaho, or if there are any cases that come close to this. And so, look, here's the thing. By no means am I a historian or a criminal history expert for Idaho, but there is one case out of the Boise area that's worth comparing Vallow's case to. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But here's the thing first off. The Vallow case is totally in a league of its own, it appears. There's the circumstances, the allegations, the deaths. It's really just all so bizarre and unique that there's possibly not a perfect story to compare it to. However, going off that, we could look at cases involving mothers harming their children or deserting them. So I touched base with a couple of sheriffs in our area, in North Idaho, to see if there's anything they recall in their careers that was like the Vallow case. And no surprise, they told me nothing really comes close. Now, we'll make some brief mention of one case that happened in North Idaho in the fall of 2016, though. Now, keep in mind, this is way different than the Vallow case, but is possibly the closest thing we could compare to in our neck of the woods, and this actually was a case that I covered at the time. So, in November 2016, Misty Phelps, a Coeur d'Alene mother, was found in her car along with her 2 toddler sons submerged in Fernand Lake. Not a good story.
But those were my precious baby boys, and all I could ever think about was raising them, teaching them.
That was the father of the boys and the ex-husband of Misty Phelps speaking after their deaths, and he was in tears during this fall interview outside of his North Idaho home. Fernand Lake is a smaller lake located just to the east of Lake Coeur d'Alene, and you actually drive by it as you head east out of town as I-90 starts to climb. So Phelps's car was underwater at a boat launch there, and crews recovered the bodies of Phelps, who was 25 at the time, and the bodies of 2-year-old Riley Phelps and 1-year-old Tristan Phelps. 2 really young kids. A super sad story.
Yeah, just babies. I remember this story. I remember us covering it when they found the car in the water. It was unclear if there was anyone in the car. And then, of course, we heard that news, and it was devastating, all around. It's a very sad story. But fill me in exactly what happened after that.
Well, in terms of why the deaths happened, that's kind of unclear. But we do know that Phelps was going through a lot. Phelps and the father of the boys were in the process of getting a divorce in the months leading up to their deaths. And that's something that the father did address when speaking after the case, after the deaths had happened.
I'd say to people out there that don't get along, start getting along. It's not worth it. And kids that are drug into people, grown-ups' indifferences, to stop with the kids. You don't involve kids. They're innocent. They don't deserve that.
Now, in comparing that quote to the Vallow case, it's worth noting that J.J. Vallow was mentioned in divorce papers from Charles, his adoptive dad. Again, we've talked about how Charles approached authorities talking about Lori's behavior and the things she was saying. Divorce documents made mention of Lori making claims of wanting to kill Charles and ruin him financially. But those documents filed by Charles also argue that Lori's strange behavior was causing emotional harm to JJ since he had special needs. So, okay, going back to the Phelps case, going back to this local case with the kids drowning in the car, according to local reports, a man was charged in Kootenai County with selling Phelps meth the day before she was found dead in the lake. And in court documents, friends told authorities that the mother was, quote, extremely unwell and she was acting erratic. She could potentially have been on drugs.
So is this an overdose situation?
That isn't super clear. So I reached out to the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office regarding this, and the agency said that detectives were basically unable to determine if it was a murder-suicide. The department's investigations commander put it as saying, we'll never really know because the only witnesses are no longer with us. And hey, that's sad. That's rough. That's, I gotta imagine, frustrating for investigators. So basically, investigators haven't been able to determine if the deaths were accidental or intentional. Again, Phelps's car was found in the lake off of a boat launch, so I say that because it's not like she drove off a ledge or went careening off of a road or anything like that. It was the boat launch right there by a parking lot. No doubt a sad case all around.
Yeah, terrible to think about. Similarities, yes, between the Vallow case, witnesses no longer with us. Vallow case, we may have 2 potential witnesses in their case, but
Divorce proceedings involved
divorce
prior.
proceedings. If Uncle Alex is involved in any other deaths, we know he was involved in Charles' death. He was a witness to that. He's no longer with us. So some parallel, issues there, but also defendants in the case. We have 2 in the Vallow case, and we have none in the Phelps case. So some striking differences there.
So, like we mentioned earlier, the Vallow case is just so unique and it's hard making perfect comparisons. So, why mention this case? Well, it's local to where we are and is also in Idaho. That's one reason. Again, not a perfect comparison, but it does involve harm being done to children and the behavior of the children's mom coming into question as well. Like the Vallow case, the death of Misty Phelps' boys was preceded by a divorce, as we mentioned, and some had said Phelps had been acting strange before the incident happened. The case also left us with some question marks as to truly what happened and what role the mother played, just like Lori Vallow, how she's not officially charged with murder. Okay, so speaking of other notable cases in Idaho, another case we want to focus on more is that of Robin Rowe. She's the lone woman on Idaho's death row, so that's her and 7 men awaiting execution in the state. So, more about Rowe. She was convicted of first-degree murder in the arson deaths of her husband and 2 kids in February of 1992. And so this all happened in Ada County, which is where Boise is. Here's the backstory. Rowe had set fire to their home in the early morning hours, and her husband Randy and 10-year-old son Joshua and 8-year-old daughter Tabitha, they were all killed by carbon monoxide poisoning.
My mother had called and told me that my brother was dead. And I am like in shock. Like, you gotta be kidding, you know? You think this isn't true.
That's Robin Rowe's former sister-in-law reacting just to this awful story. According to court records, as reported by the Associated Press, Rowe and her husband were in an abusive relationship. At the time of the killings, Rowe's 2 kids from a previous marriage were living with her husband. They were separated. Rowe was staying with a friend at the time, and she actually woke up early one morning claiming that she had a bad feeling that something was wrong with her home.
Okay, so she wasn't there.
Correct.
So how do they know she's to blame?
Well, okay, so investigators would eventually determine that the fire at this duplex was intentionally set and was fed with some kind of petroleum product. And another thing, the home's circuit breaker for the smoke detector was also shut off.
This was probably the most premeditated, in some ways, premeditated for gain murders that I've seen.
So that's former Ada County Sheriff Gary Rainey. He spoke with our sister station in Boise on the 20-year anniversary of the killings, and Sheriff Rainey was the lead investigator at the time of the deaths, and he actually was the one who arrested Robin Rowe, and he described her as being an extreme psychopath, and he didn't mince words about this. Prior to the deaths, Robin Rowe had taken out life insurance policies on her family. A $250,000 policy had covered her kids, and the most recent policy had been taken out just a couple of weeks before the murders.
For her, it was a matter of, would I rather have this money or would I rather have my husband and my 2 kids? And she's a sociopath, and so she could make the decision, I'd rather have the money.
And here's where this sad story really gets, unfortunately, even more interesting. Former Sheriff Rainey says he believes Rowe killed 2 other kids of hers, but was never caught or charged. 2 of her own children.
Wait, so she had other children prior to this incident?
Correct, and they died. So this is all according to Sheriff Rainey as he was speaking with KTVB, our sister station in Boise. Okay, so in 1976 in New Hampshire, Rowe's 15-month-old daughter died. The girl's cause of death initially was listed as SIDS, S-I-D-S, which stands for Sudden Infant Death Syndrome. According to the Centers for Disease Control, SIDS deaths often happen while a baby is sleeping and there are no obvious causes before an investigation happens. And SIDS is also used to describe the death of a child that's less than a year old.
But you mentioned that Rowe's girl was 15 months old, right?
Exactly, yeah, and the sheriff pointed that out. He believes that Rowe smothered her daughter at the time, and she was living in a situation where the child was a burden to her, as he put it. Okay, so that was in 76. 4 years later, in 1980, a fire at a cabin in California killed the 6-year-old son of Robin Rowe. That boy's name was Keith. So, in this instance, Rowe was staying in a borrowed cabin with the boy, according to Rainey, when a fire broke out. Now, the sheriff added that forensic evidence at the scene suggested that the boy's bedroom door was locked and that one of those electric heaters was pushed up against blankets on his bed. Not good. The boy was unable to escape, and investigators ruled the fire to be an accident. Here's the thing, though. Robin Rowe later ended up collecting $28,000 in life insurance from the boy's death.
Okay, so was she charged at all with that?
Not really. So, former Sheriff Rainey argued that Rowe could have likely been charged with those deaths after the fact, but that didn't happen because her case in Boise was going forward. The case with the estranged husband and the 2 kids.
Her new quote-unquote family.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. So, and again, Rowe was convicted in the Ada County fatal arson, and she's currently on the state's death row. At her sentencing in 1993, a judge described Rowe as, quote, the embodiment of the cold-blooded, pitiless slayer. But as is often the case with, death penalty cases, Rowe has been exhausting multiple appeals to her case. She's made claims that she had brain damage, and she's also claimed that a secret recording of phone calls shouldn't have been allowed as evidence in her case. She's been trying a bunch of things. She's also claimed prosecutor misconduct. So in 2013, a stay of execution was reopened on her matter. A spokesman with the Idaho Attorney General's office says her appeals process, Rowe's appeals process, is still going on, and the state is awaiting a decision from a judge related to a hearing in 2017. Now, the AG's office said Rowe could still potentially appeal to the Ninth Circuit Court or to the Supreme Court. That's how our system works. But based on those possibilities, it's hard to speculate on a timeline on if or when she'd be put to death. So, in closing, with this Robin Rowe matter, former Sheriff Rainey told our sister station that having known Robin Rowe's personality, he believes she deserves the death penalty.
But every day up until that day, she's not able to manipulate other people. She's not able to get anything out of her web of lies. She's not going to kill any more children.
If you love your family and your children, you don't kill them. She makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. That's how I feel about her.
The sister of Rowe's husband, the guy who was killed in the early 90s arson, was quoted as saying that with each appeal Rowe makes, it's like salt being poured on the wounds of family members.
Well, she didn't give them a chance. They didn't get 20 extra years on their lives.
When looking up this case, Jen, unfortunately, it was just kind of like really stereotypical, cliche, unfortunately, in a sense, with the life insurance policies and all this stuff.
Yeah, and, it's going to take years for that court case to play out, as the case for many death sentences. So it'll be interesting to see if that sets any sort of precedent for the Vallow case.
I'm Mark Hanrahan. In my KREM 2 Verify reports, I take your questions and investigate if they're true or false.
If you get the coronavirus and you get over it, can you get it a second time?
The short answer is yes, they can.
So we can verify it is possible to get COVID-19 twice, but at this point, experts say the evidence suggests it's rare. Do you have information you want me to verify?
Verify, only on KREM 2 News.
Okay, so back to Lori Vallow's case. We wanted to get some insight from a legal expert regarding her potential trial and some court hearings.
The bigger the city, the easier it is to find jurors who can get involved.
That's Sam Newton.
In a smaller community, it's going to be a lot harder.
He's a professor with the University of Idaho's Law School in Moscow. Now, I've interviewed him before regarding stories about Idaho's legal system, and hence why I wanted to reach out to him again. I first asked Newton if the Vallow case really stands out in one way or another or is super unique for Idaho, and he told me that from a court system or a legal standpoint, it's not necessarily one of a kind. The grisly details or the publicity is another matter, of course, but still, we did talk about some interesting things. First off, there's the aspect of pretrial publicity and Vallow's right to a fair trial. So keep in mind, this case is getting major national attention. And Madison County, where Rexburg is located, has just under 40,000 people, so a little bit smaller. Finding fair jurors or jurors who don't have extensive knowledge of the case could potentially, and again I say potentially, be challenging. Here are some snippets of what Newton and I talked about over the phone regarding the Vallow case.
If you've got people that have preformed opinions about the case or people who know so much about the case that they can't be fair and impartial, that would be a big problem. And especially I would think in Southeast Idaho, that might be an issue. There might be people who know witnesses or familiar with the case quite intimately.
And how common or rare is it that trial venues get changed to avoid something like that?
I'm not sure how common it is. I think judges are reluctant to do it because then that involves the judge having to travel, the court staff having to travel, people staying in hotels.
Okay, then we got to talking about religion and how that could or couldn't play into the case, potentially. Again, the case itself and Chad Daybell's writings have religious undertones, as we've mentioned in previous episodes. Now, again, to be clear, it appears Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow weren't operating officially as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, at least in regards to Daybell's books. Again, we've mentioned he had his own publishing company and whatnot, so he was kind of on his own. And people who knew them have made it clear that they were operating on the fringes of the church, really in a very small, unofficial offshoot sect. One church historian who teaches at Utah State told an Arizona TV station that the couple's beliefs are undoubtedly extreme. And we should also point out that some people who were in the same circles as Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow said that the couple were part of several small groups and not necessarily a large cult. So they were kind of on their own. The website eastidahonews.com interviewed some of those people, and one woman said cult wasn't necessarily an appropriate word, but rather extremist group. And another said Daybell didn't have a big group of followers in eastern Idaho, but rather just went around and spoke with several small groups on his own time. Okay, so either way, Newton, the University of Idaho law professor, pointed out that Idaho law says that in a courtroom, you can't discriminate based on someone's religion. So what does that mean? So you can't question their credibility because of their beliefs. However, prosecutors can reference religion when providing a motive, a reason as to why someone committed a crime. Here's some more from Newton.
For example, I could see in the Daybell case, a prohibited thing would be saying, because this witness is active Latter-day Saint, this person is more likely to be credible, or that because this person was not. Those are not... You're not allowed to do that. However, you can bring up a party can bring up a person's religious belief if it is relevant for some other purpose. So maybe it gives the person the motive to commit the crime. I committed this crime out of a religious belief. Well, then the prosecutor has to be able to present evidence that this religious belief was the motive or the motivating factor in creating that.
Newton went on to say that religion could potentially become an issue when trying to seat a fair jury, though. Here he is again.
The Daybell case, for example, has a lot of religious overtones or undertones or whatever that might be, and jurors may be unwilling to judge the case fairly because of religious beliefs, and that can be a problem. And so often it's worth exploring with jurors if any of them have strong religious beliefs. For example, you may have active LDS members who might be very troubled by people who are on the fringes of Mormonism, and they may not be able to be fair because of that, or the other way around. You may have people who are not members of the Mormon Church and who maybe treat any sort of religious beliefs like those as very suspicious.
And it's worth pointing out that data compiled by Slate.com in 2012 listed Madison County, where Rexburg is located, as being nearly 80% LDS.
And you briefly mentioned the case also involves rumors of a cult. Now, in divorce documents filed by Lori's late husband, Charles, before he died, he said Lori believes she is a God assigned to carry out the work of the 144,000 at Christ's second coming in July 2020. And we know Chad also wrote several apocalyptic novels based loosely on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints religious theology. And you might remember from episode 1 as well, Charles told police as Lori became increasingly obsessed with Chad's books, her behavior became more erratic. And CBS reports both were involved in a group that promotes preparedness for the biblical end times. Now, Lori and Chad have not spoken to the public, so the exact nature and extent of their beliefs is really difficult for any outsider to gauge. However, those court records do give us some insight. Now, according to court documents, Lori's friend Melanie Gibb told police Lori thought both kids had turned into zombies and that they were just hard to handle, and that Chad put that idea in her head. Now, according to Gibb, Lori believed that once a person was possessed by a zombie, their spirit goes into limbo, where it's stuck until the body is killed. To date, no murder charges have been filed in the case against Vallow, Daybell, or anyone else who may be connected to these crimes. Right now, both Lori and Chad are facing charges for conspiring to destroy, alter, or conceal evidence. Both have pleaded not guilty. Investigators have not released the cause of death in either child, even though they say they are victims of homicide, but they've remained tight-lipped about who they believe might have killed them. Now, to bring about murder charges, they need to know first the cause of death. And if it was murder, be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt who is responsible.
Okay, so here's my question. While we know the bodies were found on his property, it doesn't necessarily mean Chad murdered them?
Correct. So that's going to be something that prosecutors will have to prove if they do file murder charges in this case. They're just going to have to look at the evidence and see what it tells them. Now, we now know the fate of the children and the fates of the men closest to them, though what remains to be determined is the fate of the last two living potential witnesses to their deaths, their mother, Lori Vallow, and Chad Daybell. Authorities are still investigating the deaths of Charles Vallow and Tammy Daybell, and since Vallow and Daybell are facing nearly identical charges, a judge ruled they will be tried at the same time, though at the time of this recording, a date for that combined trial has yet to be set. Both pleaded not guilty to any involvement. This is 1 Foot in the Grave. Additional sources for this episode of 1 Foot in the Grave brought to you by CBS News, Tegna, PostRegister.com, and ABC. And music by Jason Gray.